First group of 700 Cuban doctors arrived back in Havana after Bolivia's coup. Chileans continue to protest against neoliberalism as mass demonstrations are set to mark a month. Sri Lanka's nationalist leader Rajapaksa has been declared the new president. Hello and welcome to Telesur. I'm Carla Gonzalez in Quito and this is from the South. We begin with our top story, which is Bolivia. Various Bolivian lawmakers have rejected a decree announced by the country's de facto government that exempts police and armed forces from investigations into human rights abuses against anti-coup demonstrations. They said they will challenge it in a court.
Not only our constitution guarantees human rights, but Bolivia is also part of various international human rights treaties and agreements. These treaties state that human rights cannot be violated, yet they are being violated right now. Basic human rights are not being respected when force is being used. The police should discourage violent behavior, while the army shouldn't be in the streets repressing people. The army has a very special function, but this decree is a license for killing. It is unconstitutional.
Our correspondent Alejandro Kirk has more details from Murillo Square in La Paz.
This is Plaza Murillo in downtown La Paz, the National Assembly on my back. This morning, representatives of the Movimiento al Socialismo, the socialist movement of President Evo Morales, called for other political forces and the government to stop repression, to stop killing people, and to unite in, especially the representatives of the opposition movements, of the right-wing movements of Bolivia, to unite with them in calling for peace and stop repression and killings, which have risen a lot in the past few days. Repression especially in the southern zone of Cochabamba. Some developments have been taking place here, political developments. The UN Special Envoy Jean Arnaud is in the country. He's meeting with social movements and the government in order to promote dialogue and stop to the stalemate that there is that's happening right now. Stalemate, I say, because although the government seems to be firm in power in terms of military and police, the city of La Paz and El Alto, the twin city next to La Paz, are blocked by there is no food, there is no fuel coming in.
Our correspondent Alejandro Kirk from Bolivia. And Bolivians have organized soup kitchens in La Paz and El Alto to bring citizens relief from food shortages due to road blockades. Supporters of deposed President Evo Morales have been demonstrating against the country's de facto government for a week now. The situation is increasingly violent as the government is stepping up repression against protesters. According to Bolivia's ombudsman, at least 24 protesters have died in clashes between protesters and security forces.
We are bringing food for our brothers and sisters who are marching here in Sacaba. I feel love for the people, and we know they are suffering, and that's why we are bringing them something to eat.
I'm here to help our comrades who are holding the blockade. The massacre in Sacaba was really bad. They kill us like animals. How could they do such thing? We want justice.
And Bolivians also demanded justice during the funeral of at least 8 campesinos who were killed on Friday in the town of Sacaba during violent clashes with security forces. As the death toll rises to 24, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights has condemned the measures of the de facto government to authorize the military control of public order while being exempt from criminal charges.
We want justice for ourselves, for the people killed in the protests. There is no justice for us. There is nothing. No hospital is treating us. We are suffering. We are being beaten. We want justice. We don't want any massacre.
We are not happy. Janine Áñez has to resign. It is the agreement. She is not president. She is not our president.
The first group of around 700 Cuban doctors have arrived in Havana from Bolivia after being forced to leave the country by the de facto government. Cuba says about 10 doctors, including the coordinator of its medical mission, were detained this week and 4 remained in custody. This as Bolivia's foreign ministry said that it was terminating Cuba's medical mission in the country, claiming that the doctors were instigating protests after the government of Cuba strongly condemned the coup in Bolivia. Cuba has sent more than 30,000 health workers to work in more than 60 countries around the world.
We can describe as unfair and unacceptable the constant attacks against our medical collaboration by the government of the United States that seeks to denigrate the altruistic work that more than 400,000 professionals have had a leading role in during almost 6 decades in 164 countries.
We suffered from a lot of stubbornness, violence, and that's where our colleagues, fourth-year colleagues, are. They searched their homes as if we were terrorists. We are not terrorists. We give life to people who need it, the poorest in each town.
In other news, Chileans continue to protest in the capital, Santiago, as mass demonstrations against the neoliberal policies of President Sebastián Piñera mark almost a month. Citizens have been demanding significant changes in the government's policies regarding social rights through demonstrations, and they have been primarily against Piñera. As you can see in this video, protesters have also condemned the absence of former presidential candidate Beatriz Sanchez and the left-wing Broad Front Party in the protests and negotiations with the government. Our correspondent in Santiago, Leonel Retamal, has more.
Este domingo 17 de noviembre.
Various social movements and sectors have renewed their calls for the Chileans to continue protesting as mass demonstrations against the government of Sebastián Piñera will mark 1 month on Monday. But not everyone is happy with the advances the protests have reached, like the agreement with the government to rewrite the Pinochet-era constitution. Many Chileans see this as a maneuver by politicians to avoid agreeing to another major demands of the protesters, despite a referendum that will ask citizens whether they want a new constitution and what level of involvement parliamentarians should have in the process. It is still not guaranteed that the rewriting will involve a constituent assembly, as protesters have been demanding. Meanwhile, the government hasn't addressed demands regarding the improvement of education, health, pension, and housing. So, social movements continue to call on Chileans to remain on the streets until these demands are all addressed.
That was our correspondent, Leonel Retamal. And the president of the Chilean Teachers Association, Mario Aguilar, has strongly rejected the proposed process for writing a new constitution that several parties had backed.
We have to say that there are aspects which, to our understanding, are part of the demands of the people, but are deceitful in defining how to elect members of the Constituent Assembly if that option is voted for in the referendum. Using the same election system currently used for election lawmakers will only favor political parties and give them an advantage. What the Chileans demand is a citizen assembly, which is not led by parties. On the other hand, they are taking away the sovereignty of the people. When they set the rules of the game for creating the Constituent Assembly, it needs to be a sovereign assembly that determines its own procedures, its own quorum, its own functions, and make its own decisions.
We'll take a short break now, but join us again in a minute.
Yeah.
Welcome back. More stories at this hour. The Nicaraguan government has presented a national strategy for a culture of dignity, respect, nonviolence, reconciliation, and peace, with the aim of raising awareness about the importance of living in harmony.
The Sandinista government has advanced on the implementation of laws, programs, and projects to promote and strengthen a culture of peace and equity. This plan is the continuity of the peace commissions formed after the failed coup attempt of April 2018.
This allows us to guide ourselves in the course of life itself, because this is not something we are doing for today, for tomorrow. It is something permanent that we must develop. But above all, it is going to generate different mechanisms for the improvement of these spaces, and we are going to strengthen each one in institutional life, in public life, but above all in the life of families.
This plan includes 10 strategic lines, such as detecting signs of violence in all its forms. These are then studied for application in municipalities, youth, police, ministry, Sandinista media, culture, sports, schools, human rights, among others.
There are rights in Nicaragua, and in this moment, the advancements of human rights, the knowledge, the recognition of the human rights that we have, but also the sense of social responsibility that exists, not only from the state, but also from the people.
The strategy is inclusive. Workshops, assemblies, training programs are implemented to develop the country, while promoting knowledge of the Constitution, laws, civil and penal codes to ensure awareness among the people.
Through this strategy, we are allowing ourselves to live better, to live in peace. We are getting to know our rights.
Another of the important points of this strategy is to alert about the foreign influences in Nicaraguan culture and in the vision and the way of understanding life. To work on everything that attacks the healthy ways of resolving conflicts and difficulties in society. Authorities assure that the idea is to move forward, and each year they will review new things to integrate into this plan.
Leaders of the BRICS group of emerging economies have said that there is a politically motivated protectionism at a time of a global slowdown. At their annual summit, the leaders of South Africa, Russia, China, India and Brazil called for greater inter-BRICS trade and investment and urged the group's new development bank to pump more funding into infrastructure and sustainable growth. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa pointed out that to tackle the global economy slowdown, BRICS countries need to avoid being introverted and find a common ground in trade relationships.
This engagement here today is one of those essential channels through which we can find common ground on common challenges. Key countries in the global economy are currently facing slowing growth, complex challenges to their trading relationships, or a turn away from the open, rules-based global trading system to being much more closed and introvert.
The University of the West Indies opened a campus in St. Lucia and officially signed a memorandum of understanding with Venezuela's School of Planning. Telesur's correspondent Winston Springer has the details from Castries.
The die is cast following the signing of the Memorandum of Understanding between the University of the West Indies, represented by the Open Campus, and the Venezuelan School of Planning. This is in keeping with a bid to further capacity building and offer greater access to human resource training through public education. Officials from the two institutions of higher learning formally affixed their signatures to the MOU on Monday, November 11, 2019, at the UWI Open Campus on Mont Fortune in Castries, St. Lucia. Acting head of the St. Lucia campus, Leslie Crane Michelle, says the agreement has been long in the making.
It is, of course, a general MOU that has been signed, essentially saying that we agree to collaborate on the offering of programs to the people of St. Lucia. As it stands at this stage, the programs would be the programs that belong to, or emanate from, the Venezuela School of Planning, but of course we will provide the technical part of it, they will be offered through the University of the West Indies Open Campus, St. Lucia.
The first course of study will cover a problematic area for St. Lucia. The Open Campus, through its Venezuelan partners, will offer a diploma in building planning.
As you know, we have been having many problems in St. Lucia with just that. Okay, a lot of our buildings not being maintained properly and causing all sorts of problems. So we thought that would be a very, very good place to start. So we are hoping that if everything goes according to plan, and of course we get the response that we expect to get once we begin advertising, that we should be able to get this off the ground by the middle of February.
Representatives from the Venezuelan School of Planning are buoyed by the agreement and eager to lend their expertise to further advance opportunities for higher education in the region.
We have the first the best professionals to participate as a docent.
Con amplia experiencia en el área de la construcción.
With a huge experience regarding to the experience of the maintaining of buildings.
The courses will be conducted via online learning platforms by professors from Venezuela who are proficient in the English language. Officials hope that this signing of the Memorandum of Understanding will redound to the benefit of both learning institutions. Winston Springer Jr., Telesur, Castries, St. Lucia.
Now we turn to news from Africa. Algerian presidential candidates have launched their campaigns for the December elections in midst of protests against the planned polls. All the 5 candidates have started campaigning for the elections scheduled for December 12th. However, protesters rallied and insisted the vote will not be fair. The opposition movement emerged this year demanding the ruling hierarchy related to the former president quits power. They have vowed not to support any election until more senior officials stand aside.
We are here to say no, that elections won't happen. Elections won't happen until people decide they will. The people are the ones to decide when and how to organize an election.
Supporters of ousted Sudanese leader Omar al-Bashir held a protest to oppose a move by the country's new authorities to hand him over to the International Criminal Court. The protesters rejected the proposed use of foreign tribunals to handle Sudanese domestic matters. The ICC has accused al-Bashir of having committed war crimes, a charge which he has denied. Al-Bashir has been imprisoned in Sudan since being forced out of power, facing corruption charges.
Therefore, we ask government officials to restore confidence in the Sudanese judiciary and not to submit the president to the International Criminal Court.
Angola's main opposition party, UNITA, has appointed a new leader after 18 years of losing elections. The party elected lawmaker Adalberto Costa Jr. as its new leader, replacing Isaiah Samakuva, who had resigned earlier. He was the party's president since 2003, after its founder Jonas Savimbi was killed in a clash with government forces. But the former rebel group has lost every election it has contested since it transformed into an opposition party in 2002.
I expect my candidate to improve the lives of all Angolans, and not just for the National Union for the total independence of Angola. My wish is that he promotes the lives of the Angolan people.
A cartoon festival in Ivory Coast brings migration into the spotlight, highlighting the deadly risks people take in search for a better life. Drawings like a coffin-shaped boat filled with migrants at Abidjan's Kokoboul Festival paint a tragic picture of the reality of immigration, which is this year's theme. The cartoons aim to show people the dangers, such as murder, rape, enslavement, and drowning, that thousands of African migrants face during their journey to other countries.
The drawing explains the dangers of illegal immigration, is to make Africans aware that their lives are at stake when they embark on this adventure.
I think that images are more meaningful because, as I said, an image is worth 1,000 words. So through an image, it is easy to understand because it is a fairly simple approach that allows someone who cannot read or write to see the image, the cartoon. There is a message that we can understand or see.
We have more stories coming up. Stay with us.
We are present at every event where our nations are staring. We believe in a new global vision, united in every broadcasting. We keep expanding our horizons and working on a closer and better communication. Now, in Grenada, Telesur, the news source from South America and the Caribbean.
Thank you for joining us again. Sri Lanka's nationalist leader has been declared the winner of the presidential election. Former Civil War-time defense chief Gotabaya Rajapaksa was declared the winner. He won with 52.25% of the votes, while his main rival and government housing minister Sajit Premadasa got 41.99%. Rajapaksa will be sworn into office as new president on Monday.
Firstly, I am thankful to the people of the country for placing their trust in me and electing me as your new president. I would like to honor the trust you have placed in me.
Clashes between protesters and security forces in Hong Kong have continued and turned more violent. Protesters are no longer just rallying against authorities, but now demonstrators also are attacking government supporters. On Saturday, these government supporters were reportedly attacked while marching against vandalism taking place during protests. In another incident, a police officer has reportedly been struck by an arrow as fierce clashes raged around a university campus, which had turned into a protest base. Israeli police have fired tear gas at protesters in Bethlehem in support of a Palestinian journalist who had been injured by a rubber bullet. Journalists and activists were marching in support of journalist Muath Amarne, who was hit on his left eye by a rubber bullet shot by Israeli soldiers while covering a story in the southern West Bank. Amarne is still waiting for confirmation whether he has lost all sight in his left eye.
We came to show solidarity with our colleague Muat, whose eye was injured a few days ago in Sarf village. We discovered that all the eyes of journalists are targeted by Israeli soldiers. What happened today is a direct targeting by the occupation forces of Palestinian photo and video journalists. The attack on us today is a systematic program towards Palestinian photographers and cameramen for no reason. This is a peaceful march of solidarity with our colleague Muat.
Iraqi protesters occupied part of the main bridge in Baghdad, pushing closer to the so-called Green Zone, the capital's fortified seat of government. Security forces were blocking the remaining part of the bridge on Saturday, and on Sunday they used tear gas and bombs to drive away protesters. Iraq has seen violent protests since early October over corruption, lack of jobs and public services. But more than 300 people have been killed so far in Baghdad and southern Iraq. Demonstrators are now demanding the departure of Iraq's ruling class. Russia is set to resolve its long-standing conflict with Ukraine. As part of efforts to end its standoff, Moscow is set to return on Monday Navy ships seized a year ago. It is also preparing for a summit aimed at resolving the conflict between the two countries. Russia seized 2 Ukrainian gunboats and a tugboat in November last year as they headed through the Kerch Strait. The peace process will see an end to a series of military actions in Ukraine, which started in February 2014. Italian authorities are bracing themselves for another exceptional high tide in Venice, just days after a devastating flooding. The iconic St. Mark's Square is closed due to the increasing water level. A high tide of around 1.6 meters was expected to peak at 12 p.m. local time on Sunday. The city experienced its worst flooding in 50 years last week, with much of the streets still flooded. It is estimated that the damages reach around $1 billion. Thousands of Greek citizens have marched in Athens to commemorate the 1973 uprising against a United States-backed junta. Over 10,000 people marched in remembrance of dozens who died in the military crackdown on a student uprising against the junta. In recent years, demonstrators have used the anniversary to voice opposition to U.S. imperialism and the harsh austerity measures imposed on Greece by international creditors after the global financial crisis.
Just like in the past, students rose up and resisted autocratic policies, dictatorship policies of that time. Now we follow their lead, of course in a completely different political scene, but neoliberal and harsh in every aspect, especially education.
And with that, we end our news brief, but you can find all of our stories on our website, telesurenglish.net. And be sure to also join us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.